in the subsequent battle that's going to be fought in this chapter, it becomes very important for Humphrey and Maude to show that they can be just as brave as Wolf Larsen. In fact, Maude refuses to even hide herself from the battle to simply show that just because she believes in ideals doesn't make her any less weak. In that, Wolf Larsen looks at her admiringly, with admiration, and says that she could be the wife of a pirate king, right? And interestingly enough, this idea scares her more than any gunfire can. We see once again this idea that he is possibly falling in love with her, and this is far more disturbing to her and far more scary than anything else that's going on. Interestingly enough, through this battle, there are a couple of terms that the book uses that you might not be familiar with. So we'll just go over some of those terms just to make sure that you know them. One term it uses is bulkhead, right? A bulkhead basically on a ship is just as simple as it's a wall, right? I mean, a bulkhead is just a wall within the ship, right? That's pretty simple. Another word you might not know is vim. Vim usually refers to robust energy, right? Usually the term vim is used in the phrase vim and vigor, right? That's usually when you hear about vim. Vim just simply means energy, right? It's fairly simple stuff. Another term, like this is before the battle, that you might not be familiar with, is they talk about having a gam. Have a gam with us, right? Gam simply refers to talk, chat, gossip. It's one of those old sailing terms. Don't ask me where it comes from. But the thing is, it's an old term where, my grandmother has said, hey, let's have a gam. So, I'm not entirely sure how that phrase went out of it. Another term, garrulity, right? Which is referring to something being garrulous. Garrulous just means chatty, loquacious, right? When you're garrulous, you just talk a lot, right? It's just, again, just fancy older words, right? One of the other terms it uses is alacrity, right? Alacrity is one of those really interesting words, and the interesting way in which Jack London uses it, in spite of the fact that Wolf Larsen is such a tyrant and he's such a bad captain and he's been so cruel with them, right? He says he's surprised at how readily the sailors obey him and the quote-unquote alacrity that they show in obeying his orders. Alacrity can mean a lot of different words in different contexts, but in this case, alacrity usually refers to aptitude or readiness, right? It's one of those words that, because it's an older word, people sometimes misuse it now and again. But the basic idea that we need to understand in terms of what's going on is that even though Wolf Larsen is this really harsh character, very cruel, and even though he's done a lot of things to make people dislike him and even want to murder him, when it's time for battle, right, everyone immediately obeys Wolf Larsen. The thing that is kind of being shown in this is even though Wolf Larsen would be a terrible peacetime leader, he's definitely not anyone you would ever want as president. As a general in the battle, he shows great strategy, great skill, great valor, right? He leads from the front, right? There's that expression, leads from the front. Right? In the battle, he's on the front line. He's not a general just commanding from the back. He's leading his men all the way, right? But the other thing that makes Wolf Larsen very interesting in this particular story is that he's so savage and he's so brutal and he's so violent and he has all this joy in the struggle that he actually gives confidence to his men as they fight. One of the things about Wolf Larsen as a character, he's this thing we call larger than life, right? The thing about someone who's a brute like Wolf Larsen, even though as a captain, as someone who's running your life, it's a nightmare, there is this expression, it is better to be at the right hand of the devil than in his path. In this particular sense, they're all glad that Wolf Larsen is the one giving the orders and that Wolf Larsen is on their side, right? One of the interesting kinds of debates about this book, because this book is ultimately about survival, right? It seems that a personality like Wolf Larsen, right, thrives in war and thrives in a warlike situation. Interestingly enough, that once they're in the middle of a sea battle, this could be Wolf Larsen's finest hour, right? In the sense that he skillfully commands, everyone follows him, they have faith in his ability to get them through this because the guy is just like an invincible savage, right? One of the key ideas that we need to see here, though, is that in spite of all of Wolf Larsen's competence, right, his ability, him showing he has the ability to get them through, is this is a battle that he created. As well as he performs in the battle, is it a good battle? Because it's a battle they could have avoided entirely. But the reason why Wolf Larsen engages in this battle is for one reason and one reason only, for profit, right? I mean, he is there to hog the seals, right? And in being there to hog the seals, right, they're fighting for their own economic self-interest. In this case, right, in this idea of fighting over territory, right, one of the interesting ideas about this is when capitalism is talked about the jungle, the survival of the fittest, it's literally come to bullets. This thing that's supposed to be a business, but it's an outlaw business, has literally not only come to blows, as in like physical violence, but it's actually come to the extent where now, right, they're actually having a real pitched battle in the text. So the thing is, right, is that interestingly enough, Wolf Larsen shows that he is best adapted to survive in savage environments, and the more savage and brutal it is, the more he's able to thrive in it. One of the interesting things about how Darwin's philosophy is being used in this text is the one that survives in Darwin is not the one who's necessarily the strongest or the fastest, but it's the one who is able to most adapt to its environment. Wolf Larsen, right, has been described as the perfect primitive man. So when stuff gets real, when stuff hits the fan, so to speak, Wolf Larsen thrives. This is the environment in which Wolf Larsen can thrive. But the key idea in terms of a Darwin fight for survival, right? The survival of the fittest, right? Because you got to remember, it's not the survival of the strongest, it's the survival of the fittest. The question is Wolf Larsen capable of adapting and surviving in any situation other than a primitive, savage, dog-eat-dog environment? And that's the reason why in situations outside of battle, Wolf Larsen is usually gaining the hatred of his crew, and they literally want to kill him, right? But in this situation, in a battle, in actual combat, he now is in an environment that's perfectly suited to who and what he is. And in that particular instance, while Hump and Maud are kind of foreign and this is not their native element, Wolf Larsen is thriving, right? Creatures thrive based on environment and adaptation. We have seen how Hump and Maud, right, they have had to adapt to this floating ecosystem that they live in. Wolf Larsen is unable to adapt to the more civilized way of being. And because of that, wherever he goes, he constantly has to create conflict. He can only thrive in a situation of conflict, which is why even though he thrives when there is conflict, he constantly has to create more danger and more conflict in order to be in an environment that suits him. Instead of learning to adapt to different environments, he's always trying to create more conflict and more primitive violence in whatever environment he is in. And in that sense, this is actually his failure to adapt. This actually makes him inferior in his ability to survive because all he can ever do is go back to what works for him, right? Always going back to battle, back to primitive, back to violence, back to conflict, right? And because of that, we're actually seeing the ways in which Wolf Larson is the most fit and also the ways in which he is the least fit. And that is all going to be coming to a head ever shortly, as his inability to evolve and adapt is going to show who is going to win this battle of sexual selection. Okay, well, that's pretty much what I wanted to cover in terms of the end of chapter 4 and chapter 25. I hope you guys are having a good Holy Week. Jesus loves you, and so do I. And I had to use some different devices to record this lecture because the uploading is being ridiculously slow. But I hope all of the videos went through clearly, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day. Jesus loves you, so do I.